Okay, sorry for the delay in beginning the meeting, but here we are. Okay, this is part 2, and I'm going to go over the scientific method. We'll go through a little bit of the chemistry of microbiology and start to look at the different microbes that we'll be dealing with being in the medical field. So to begin, let me pull this up. The scientific method, and this is important because a lot of what we do is based on the scientific method. What is science? And this is an interesting question. You could ask this of many people, and you will get many different answers. Science is actually a tool for answering questions. Now, since we're not in person, this may be a little bit awkward as far as the science quiz that we're going to go through right now, but let's go ahead and do it. What is science? This is a true or false question, or there are statements, a few statements to test your current understanding of science. So you're probably thinking this instructor is harsh, a test the first time we meet. Well, technically this isn't the first time we've met, but it would have been had we been able to get through all of the PowerPoints last night. There's just a lot of material, and I want you guys to understand as much of it as you can. I totally understand that it doesn't pay to cram anyone's head full of information. Hopefully with this course, I've designed it so that it's a systematic method of learning. So let's go on to the few statements, okay? True or false, science can't prove anything, solve any problem, or answer any question. What do you think? Okay, awkward pause. I'm sure you all answered or you didn't. I'm safe in making that statement. Anyway, this is false. The process of science, when properly applied, actually attempts to disprove ideas. And the scientific word for ideas would be hypotheses. By testing or challenging the hypothesis with observations, and we call that data or data gathered, science experiments are very carefully designed. If the idea survives testing, then it is stronger and more likely an accurate explanation. Science is a process which can only produce possible or highly probable explanations for natural phenomena. These are never certainties. That's why we still call gravity a theory, the theory of gravity. With new information, tools, or approaches, earlier findings can be replaced by new findings. And a good example of this would be after, I'd been taken off life support that many years ago and started in my rehabilitation. At the time, they didn't think that my nerves would ever regenerate. Now, since then, we have done studies, we've looked at tons of cases and found that, yes, nerve cells can regenerate. It does take a long time, but they can regenerate. So this is an example of how science can change the ideas that we've held for so long. And in previous PowerPoints, we talked about the science of hand washing. It took a long time for the medical community to adopt the practice, but that's all part of science. So can science solve any problem or answer any question? No. The realm of science is limited strictly to solving problems about the physical world, a world that we can observe with our senses. Now, keep in mind, we rely on our five senses exclusively. There are many more senses that we have that we don't even know about, I'm sure. This is a hypothesis. And there are many more senses when we get down into the nitty gritty of it. And we're not gonna focus on that at all right now, but that's something interesting in the future that we can talk about. The science is not properly equipped to handle the supernatural realm, nor the realm of values and ethics, realms that cannot be observed with our senses. And I'm sure I'll hear arguments from avid ghost hunter fans, because you know what? I fall into that category as well. I have experienced phenomena at my house that there's no explanation for other than it's a ghost or poltergeist or whatnot. And there are devices that the ghost hunters use now that can detect changes in things such as the electromagnetic field, and they use these scientific technologies to explain the supernatural world. Explanations, well, scientific explanations must be potentially disprovable. Explanations based on supernatural forces, values, or ethics can never be disproved and thus do not fall under the realm of science. Now, I'm sure Zach Baggins or Bagans, however you will pronounce it, I've heard it both ways on the show itself, Ghost Adventures, will argue with us about that, but we'll leave that to them. So science actually attempts to disprove ideas. So we never really have definite answers to anything, really, if you think about it. Here we go. Another true or false. Any study done carefully and based on observation is scientific. Is that true or false? Okay, I've given you a chance to answer. I didn't hear any answers, so I'm just going to go on. It's false. Science must follow certain rules. Otherwise, it's not science. Just as soccer is not soccer if its rules are not followed. The rules of science are intended to make the process as objective as is humanly possible, and thereby produce a degree of understanding that is as close to reality as possible. Scientific explanations must be based on careful observations and the testing of hypotheses. So objective just means not influenced by feelings, interests, and prejudices. This would be unbiased, versus subjective, that is influenced by feelings, interests, and prejudices. So they are biased. So anything subjective, we can only attribute those findings to the perceptions of the observer. So you can see how intricate this is. Science, can science be done poorly? That's a true or false? Science can be done poorly. So that's true. Anything done scientifically cannot be relied upon to be accurate and reliable. Science can be done poorly, just like any other human endeavor. We are all fallible. Some of us make fewer mistakes than others. Some observe better than others, but we're still subjective in the end. Self-correction mechanisms in science increase the reliability of its product. Now, if any of you have ever watched the TV series The Big Bang Theory, um, there are a lot of examples just in the stories of that series that show the fallibility of science, and it shows the different approaches. And I know most people don't watch it looking for things like that. They look at it for entertainment value, but I'm always keen to the scientific hypotheses that are presented and the various dilemmas that the group of friends have in that TV series. True or false? Different scientists may get different solutions to the same problem. This is very true. Science can be influenced by the race, gender, nationality, religion, politics, or economic interests of the scientists. So yeah, different scientists can get different solutions to the same problem. Intentional or unintentional sources of bias introduced in a study can result in different solutions to the same problem. Now, I have seen this in, let's take surveys, for example. Surveys can be designed to elicit any outcome that you want. One would just structure the questions so that they get the results that they want. So scientists are people, and although they follow certain rules and try to be as objective as possible, both in their observations and their interpretations, their biases are still there. And, you know, that is very true because, you know, I've done some studies in the past that, you know, I wanted to elicit certain results, and because I need to be objective, it didn't elicit the results that I had hoped for, but it did disprove my theories. Let's look at some examples. Unconscious racial bias, gender bias, social status, source of funding, or political leanings can and do influence one's perceptions and interpretations. And unfortunately, science is all too frequently misused. Because it works so well, there are those who apply the name of science to their efforts to prove their favorite cause, even if the rules of science were not followed. And I've seen a lot of this stuff going on, especially with the recent COVID pandemic that we've been dealing with, where there have been conclusions reached that really don't make a lot of sense because they are biased in the study. These causes are properly labeled pseudoscience or pseudosciences, which is false science. Also, some scientists have been known to do fraudulent work in order to support their pet ideas. Such work is usually exposed sooner or later due to the peer review system and the work of other scientists. And a good example of this is there was a study published some years back that the scientists stated that vaccines will cause this, this, and this, okay? And this doctor published the study, and it was found out later that it was flawed and it was fraudulent and it was thrown out. The peer review system, and this is what we mean by when we talk about peer-reviewed journals. The articles that are presented in those professional medical journals have been reviewed by more than just the scientists affecting the study. Their peers review the research, and then they will either get on board or say, hey, this isn't right. So you can be confident that any article in a professional trade journal such as the Journal of the American Medical Association, or sorry about that phone ring. Okay, I do need to do one thing. Okay, I apologize for that little break. Probably for you guys, it wasn't a big break, but it was for me. I had, with my son being hospitalized and his terminal condition, every time he calls, I need to take that call. Hospital visitation policies are such that they only allow each patient 2 visitors. They have to be the same 2 visitors, and they can come in only at separate times. They can't go in together. And they ended up, the 2 visitors that he has are the 2 that went with him when he was hospitalized over the weekend. So the only way I can communicate with him is by telephone, and I need to keep up with him. So once in a while when that happens, I apologize, but with the condition he's in, he needs his dad. All right, let's get back to our ideas. And I think Eddie's experience is going to give us some insight into how microbes work when they get inside the body. We talked about the opportunistic flora, which are bacteria that, as long as they stay where they are on the body, they're good for us. But if they get into an area that they shouldn't be, then they become opportunistic pathogens. So there's a lot of information that I've learned in speaking with his infectious disease specialist that is going to be relevant for this course. And I think also it shows all of us what can happen if we get lazy in our jobs. Asepsis is so important, not only to our patients, but to our patients' families and friends. So I think this is why I stress hand washing and disinfection so strongly in class, because I've seen what an unintentional infection can do to someone. So we were talking about this guy that posted a study that said vaccines are bad for everybody, and then that was found to be false. So this work is usually exposed sooner or later due to that peer review system that I was talking about. Now, the next slide is going to go over something that we went over in another slide. And like I said, with microbiology, you're going to see some repetition, because each concept is going to fit differently depending on what we're dealing with as far as microbes. So let's take a look at this again. Maybe it didn't move. Hold on. There we go. This experiment, John Needham and Spallanzani and Louis Pasteur, heat broth to kill all life within. This is the way that our autoclaves work as well. It gets what it uses is steam, heat, and pressure. So between those 3 elements, we get the total destruction of all life on the instruments or the liquids that are in the autoclave. We have to get them to a certain temperature. There has to be the proper amount of steam and the proper amount of pressure. If any of you ever remember, now my grandmother did pressure cooking, because that's how they kill microbes in food. So the autoclave kind of works, well, it does work on that same principle. If your grandmother or your mother or father or grandfather ever used a pressure cooker, they were basically, it was an autoclave. So Needham and Spallanzani did almost identical experiments. And if you remember, the key difference was that Needham didn't cover his flasks. So any material, including microbes from the surrounding air, could drift into his flasks. Spallanzani's flasks were sealed. And the difference in experimental design accounted for their opposing conclusions. With Needham, life reemerged due to spontaneous generation, but we know spontaneous generation is a lie. Things don't just appear out of nowhere. Spallanzani, the heat killed the microbes, and since the flasks were sealed, the microbes did not reappear. What is good science? Objectivity is the key to good science. To be objective, experiments must be designed and conducted in a way that does not introduce bias into the study, and scientists use the scientific method. This is an example of the scientific method. Ask a question, and there are a lot of questions that we ask as scientists. Do some background research, construct a hypothesis, and then we can test that hypothesis with an experiment. After that, we would analyze the results and draw a conclusion. If the data supports the hypothesis, we would report the results. If data do not support the hypothesis, then we think and try again, okay? So the scientific method is, I was going to say very methodical, but that's in the name. So that is a moot point. So let's look at the smallpox thing for a second again. Edward Jenner, created the first vaccine. Cowpox is an infectious disease that causes mild discomfort, aching, a few pustules, some swelling, symptoms that disappeared in a few days. It's not a big deal. Smallpox is an infectious disease that causes massive disfigurement, sometimes blindness, and often death. It's caused by two airborne virus variants, variola major and variola minor. Approximately 500 million deaths worldwide in the 20th century and millions throughout previous history of smallpox. And oh my gosh, it's so sad to see like this little girl with smallpox. We did eradicate it in 1979 and 1980 through widespread vaccination. So don't tell me vaccines don't work. I will argue that with you. I'm not saying all vaccines work, but most do. Dr. Edward Jenner was aware that farm workers believed that if they ever contracted cowpox, then they would never get smallpox. And you know what? That's true. So this is where the vaccine theory came about. Here you can see the cowpox pustules. Here you can see the results of full-blown smallpox. We're not going to do the statements and put them in order. I think if you just review, the procedure, this is shown on the screen, you should be okay. Verification is another quality control measure to eliminate bias. So results are verified by independent duplication and publication in a peer-reviewed journal. This means that everything that is printed in that journal has been reviewed by many different scientists, and they've all come to a consensus and agreed. Two or more scientists from different institutions will investigate the same question separately and get similar results. That's independent duplication. A peer-reviewed journal, this is a journal that publishes articles only after they've been checked for quality by several expert objective scientists from different institutions. So let's look at what is the difference between science, non-science, and pseudoscience. Non-science, it's outside of the domain of science, and non-science is important in human thinking and experience. And we can see this in our own lives and the different cultures across the world. There are values, religious beliefs. You can see it in art, creativity, and intuition. Subjects of non-science are usually very easily separated from science. And we won't get into a religious debate here at all. Just be aware that that's where a lot of this non-science comes from. Pseudoscience is when non-science claims to be science. So I don't know if you remember in old Westerns, there were snake oil salesmen. Hey, use this snake oil and it can cure anything. Basically that's not true. Claims that can be tested scientifically but are not. That's when non-science claims to be science. They try to pose as science. So religious science constantly upholds hypotheses instead of trying to falsify them. Unidentified flying objects. None of the UFO sightings stand to careful scrutiny. Now, I could argue that because recently the Pentagon has declassified all of the UFO material that has been collected throughout the years. And that is iffy to me. And hauntings, none of the ghost sightings stand to careful scrutiny either. Now, even though we may have had personal experiences, and I have in my house is haunted. And one day when we're just goofing off and talking about different things, I'll share one story with you that I had physical proof of. And I'm not going to go beyond that as far as ghosts and whatnot. But you can see how this could be confusing, All right, that takes care of the scientific method. And that is the only PowerPoint that I'm going to share with this particular recording because I need to rest my voice again before I do another one. But keep your eyes open for another recording that I will share with you guys. Make sure you watch them and take notes because a lot of this stuff is going to help you out with your homework and your quizzes. We're going to get into the different types of microbes. I will introduce you to many of them. We'll actually get to see a lot of these in lab. I may need to switch weeks 2 and 3 lab due to my ability to get the culture plates and whatnot right now. Since we've changed the name of the institution and there are new employees, our supplier requires that we apply for a new account, and we're in the process of doing that right now. But the cool thing is I get to work with the same rep that I worked with in Orem, and this guy kept me supplied. When I needed something in an emergency, he made sure I had it. So hopefully we get the paperwork done today and we're able to get that stuff for next week. If not, we'll just flip week 2 for week 3 in class activity. So I'll talk to you more about that tomorrow when we meet. Now, keep in mind, we're doing CPR tomorrow. We'll review microscope 2 after we get the CPR stuff done. But make sure that you write down your questions, bring them to class with you tomorrow, and we'll be able to answer those questions then. So right now, I'm going to end this session. Thank you for listening, and I will see you next time.